Hello, thank you very much for being here. My name is Cathy Franz and I'm going to be introducing you to React.js. Welcome to the Ultimate React Crash Course. Now we are going to be diving into React from absolute scratch. Now if you already know React and you've been using it for projects, I still recommend taking this course because you are going to understand the core functionality of React, how it works behind the scenes, the deep insights of the React core. Alright, and if you're a beginner, this is the absolute best course for you to take because you're going to have a really good mastery of React as a framework, and I would guide you on how to move forward with your React career. Alright, so we are just gonna get started. So first I have a code editor here and I have a browser on the right, and the first thing we are going to do is create a new folder, and this is just going to be starter because we are starting out with React, and we are going to have a new file in here called index.html, and that's how basic we are going. We are starting with HTML and CSS. So then I would generate a new template, and this is just going to have a title of Ultimate React Crash Course. And that's it. That's our HTML file. So what is React and what are we interested in? To really understand React, you need to understand exactly what JavaScript can do at the moment. So for example, let's just open up this HTML file in the browser. I'm opening it with live server, but you can just double click on it and open it in your browser. Now if I open up the console, clean this up. Let's say we had an h1 called hello world and save it. So that's the h1. Now let's say with JavaScript, we can say get element by ID or get element by tag name or query selector, and we can select these elements based on its name. So for example, an h1, this is JavaScript, and then we can change the content by setting text content to be equal to hi friends, and now you can see it changes to hi friends. That's JavaScript. JavaScript is very powerful. This means we can fetch data from a database or from an API and then use that to generate the page that we want the user to see. I think live server is just causing a lot of errors, so I'm just gonna review this in Finder and then double click, and now we have it just opened normally here. Okay, so no more errors, nothing like that. So that's also one way to open the file. So this is what JavaScript can do. We can use JavaScript to fetch content on a page, execute it, change that content, manipulate that content, remove elements from a page and things like that. So where does React step in? React wants to do this better, right? And we will talk about the different problems that React is trying to solve as we go along. But everything you can do with JavaScript, you can do with React. React is just going to do it better. So let's get started by pulling in React. So I'm just going to search for CDN React.js, and this is going to pull up the React.js documentation. You can see CDN links right there. I'll click that, and the first link I'm interested in is this one right here. So it says React and React DOM. We'll talk about those. I'm just going to copy the first link and paste it right before the end of the body tag. So you can see we have script, and then we have React at 17, so version 17, and then we have react.development.js. Now development is just the more development friendly React version, because it's going to show you errors, it's going to log recommendations, warnings and things like that. But there's also the production version. When you're about to send your application to production for clients to use, you wouldn't use this one, you would use the production build. Alright, so we have React. Now let's go back to our HTML, give this a refresh, and now let's say React, and now we have React right here. So React is on the window object. So this is the React library. Okay, so with HTML and CSS and JavaScript without React, we can create an element and put it on the page. But with React, we can do the same. And the reason why we are learning React is because React does it more effectively, and there's a ton of other things that React can do. But let's start with the basics. So I would create a script tag right here, and the first task we have is to display a paragraph on the page using React. Now, when is this applicable in real life? Because I always like to talk about how is it useful to me in real life so that I know best how to learn it. Now, in real life, imagine you're building a blog for a client and the client says, hey, just pull the data for this blog from an API, and you make an API request, you pull the data, and now you need to display that data on the page. With React, you can create a paragraph and then put the content of that blog into that paragraph and show it to the page. So first, how do we create a paragraph? So I'm just going to say constant paragraph is equal to React. Remember the React thing we saw. We are going to say React.create elements, and we need to pass in the name of the element. In this case, it's a paragraph. Now, the second thing we need to do is pass in any HTML attributes that we want to pass to this paragraph. For example, if we wanted to pass in a class, we would pass it as an object here and pass in some value and things like that. But in this case, we don't want to pass in any attributes, so we'll pass in null. And the final thing that we need to pass to create element is the contents of that paragraph. So maybe here you would say fetch from API. That's where you fetch the contents of the paragraph, and then you would pass it here. And in this case, we are just going to say some paragraph contents. All right, so we've created our paragraph. That's it. So now let's console.log that paragraph. So we say console.log paragraph, and we'll save that, refresh, and now you can see that we have a paragraph right here. And guess what? This paragraph is just an object. Look at it. It's just an object, right? And it has weird things that we do not understand, we don't need to understand. But now the challenge is we need to get this paragraph on the page. We've created the element, we need to get it on the page. That's when React DOM comes in. So React is not only for the browser. React can be used to, create elements, create things, tons of things anywhere. But then if we want to take those things that React creates, like an element, and put them on the page or on a web page, then we need the React DOM package. There's also React Native if you want to take those elements React creates and put them on mobile. So that's React Native. But in this case, we are doing React on the DOM, so React DOM. So I would copy that link and I would add it to our script. So that's React DOM. So how does React DOM help us? We are going to render that element on the page using React DOM. So we are going to come here and we would say React DOM. And if you do not know what you're supposed to type here, you can refresh the page. I'm just going to refresh. And now if we say React DOM, and that's because I didn't save. So I'll save this and refresh again. And now if we type React DOM, let's just type React DOM. Now you can see React DOM is available here. Look at that. Awesome, right? So now we are going to say React DOM.render, and we are going to render an element. So what do we want to render? We want to render a paragraph. And the second item that we need to pass to the render function, the render function is the one that's going to take the contents or this element that we created and then render it on the page. So we have the paragraph, and now we need to tell React DOM.render where to put that element. So let's just create a div, and we'll call this an ID of app, and now we want to put it in here. So we are just going to come here and say documents.query selector, and we'll select the element with ID of app. Okay, so first we created the paragraph using React, and now we are using React DOM.render to take that paragraph that we created with React and then render it inside a div with an ID of app. So now if we refresh this page, then we should see the paragraph on the page. And great, look at that, we have the paragraph. Alright, so we've used React to create a new element, and then we've rendered that element on the page using React DOM. So always remember, you need to know exactly the packages you have and what is their role. React can help us create elements, create components, create tons of stuff, but it wouldn't be able to, in itself, put that content on the page because that's not its role. Now, it would pass that job to React DOM. React DOM is able to take whatever you give it and then just display it on the page, right? So React DOM takes React elements and then renders them on the page. So now you can see the paragraph right there. Cool, right? So this is really powerful because now we can fetch content from an API, log a user in, things like that, just by creating elements and rendering them on the page. All right. So at this point, I'm just going to go through what we've done so that you understand again. So first we put in React, which is just like a script, just some JavaScript another person wrote. Okay. And we've included it in our HTML file. Second, we've also put in React DOM. We'll get to that. So first we use React, and React.createElement is a function that is going to help us create an HTML element using React. So the name of the element is the first parameter, and that's paragraph, which is represented by P. Then we have the second argument to the createElement function. It is a list of props that we want to pass to the newly created element. In this case, we have null. All right, but let's say we wanted to give this element an ID, and we'll just pass in ID of strange. I would save this and refresh, and now if we come to our elements and check out the body div, you'll see ID of strange right there. So this second argument is a way to pass additional props or attributes to the element that React is going to create. All right, and now the last one is the content, the children of that element. So React.createElement is going to take this content and put inside that new element that it creates. So we've got the new element. Now how do we put it on the page? That's why we need React DOM. React DOM is going to take React and represent it on a DOM. So there's also React Native, but we are not interested in that right now. So React DOM is going to say React DOM, then with its render function, take in the first argument, which is the element that React created, and the second argument is where should it put that element. And that's why we have the div with ID of app here, so that we can put it inside. And of course we can put it anywhere. We can put it in the body, but it's nice to have a place where we put it, right? And that's it. That's what we have. That's React generating this paragraph right there. Okay, so that's step 1. Now on to step 2. Let's say we wanted to have a div instead. So we wanted to have a div with a paragraph inside. So this is what we would do. We would have div here. So let's save this and refresh. So if you check the body now, you would notice that inside the body, inside the div with ID of app, we have a div inside. So let's say inside that div, we wanted to have a paragraph that has the text. So how would this look? We would have this. Instead of passing the text here, we are going to pass a new React element. So we are going to have to say React.createElement, and we would create a paragraph, and then we would pass null because we don't want to pass any properties, and then we would pass the text. And now if we refresh, now we have a div, and then inside that div we have the paragraph. Right now this is getting long and complicated, right? So let me just break this down so you can see it clearly. So first we have the div, and then inside the div we have the paragraph. All right, now what if we wanted to have a span, and then inside the paragraph we have a span, and then inside that span we have the text? So what we will have to do is copy this text, and then we would have to create React.createElement, would create our span, and now we would pass any props we had, which is null, and then we would pass the text. Okay, so now if we refresh, yes, check out the div. Inside the paragraph we have a span, right? So what it looks more complicated than normal HTML, and that's not right. That's not what we want. So if you look at the syntax, we would just keep writing nested and nested, and that's not good, right? So that's the next step of React. It's called JSX. Now what is JSX? It's a very similar thing to HTML, and it's going to help us solve this problem we have. It's going to help us write or create elements just like we would in normal HTML, and I'll show you. Now in order to write JSX, JSX is like an extension of JavaScript, like something new, right? So we need a transpiler or a compiler to understand that new weird JavaScript and then give it to us back in this format, and I'll show you exactly what we're talking about. First, I would search for babel standalone CDN, and you can see right there we have it. So I think we should visit that first link, and it should give us a CDN link right there. And I think this is the right one. Let's try it out. So I'll copy that, and then I would paste it here. Alright, so that's the babel standalone, and that's the script, and I'll explain exactly why we need that. So now we have a script that pulls in babel. Babel is sort of a compiler or transpiler that is going to take really advanced JavaScript and then bring it down to ES5 or much lower versions of JavaScript that all browsers can understand. Okay, so the next thing is we need to pass in a type here to this script, and would say this type is text/babel. And why are we doing this? It's because we are no longer going to be writing normal JavaScript. It's going to be normal JavaScript, but we're going to be using some more advanced features. And once we say type is equal to text babel, this babel right here is going to say, oh, there's a script written in babel. So I'm going to convert all of this script and then replace the content so that it's understood by the browser. All right. So now what is this going to look like? Let's comment out this paragraph. Okay, and what we are going to do now is we are going to say constant paragraph is going to be equal to a div. Look at that, it's just like HTML, right? And then inside we are going to have a paragraph, so P, and finally we are going to have a span. My typing is off today. Here we are going to just have some paragraph contents, and this is just like HTML, right? And my formatting is horrible, but I hope you can understand. It's just a div, and inside the div we have a paragraph, and inside the paragraph we have a span. And it's just like HTML. It looks exactly like HTML, right? And this is what we call JSX. So when we write it like this inside a script of type text equals babel, babel right here is going to see, hey, this is JSX, it's not HTML, it's JSX. And the browser does not understand JSX. The browser does not understand you writing this inside script tags. But babel right here is going to tell the browser, hey, I know how to handle this. Then it's going to transform this into a normal JavaScript. And then the browser would understand and do exactly the same thing that we did, which is create an element and render it with React DOM. So now let's come here and refresh, and we have the exact same thing. Okay, so let's open up the div with ID of app. We have the exact same thing right there. Now let's check out the console. No errors, everything seems fine. Now if we check out the elements, check out the script, you can see the script right there. But because we have babel, babel is transforming this script into something the browser can understand, and that's why we have this working perfectly. Okay, so what's the whole point of this? Now look at this that we have here, and look at this that we had before. Which one do you prefer to write? JSX or React.createElement? Of course you want to write JSX because it's very similar to HTML, very easy for you to write. And now we can finally begin to use the power of React without worrying too much about all of these nested things that we were writing. Alright, so that's JSX. That's it. JSX is just an extension of JavaScript, and it's gonna help us write React as if we were writing HTML like this. Alright, so there's going to be tons of JavaScript that we write, but when we are in the part of creating HTML elements or updating HTML elements, we can just write them like this, just like as if we would HTML. Alright, so just a recap of what we've talked about in this second step. We put in babel, and babel is going to convert or transpile the advanced JavaScript that we write into much simpler JavaScript. All right. So for example, Babel, even though we don't know it, this const right here is ES 2015, and some old browsers will not understand. Babel is also going to transform this into var, right? So Babel is just doing a really good job. Now we need to tell Babel, hey, this is the script I want you to transform. That's why we pass in a type of text / Babel to our script. And finally, we can use JSX. So JSX is basically almost like HTML, just a representation of, what HTML would look like. And we use that to replace the cumbersome React.create element that we have here. All right. So the React team actually released this, and people were like, oh no, it's difficult to remember. So they released JSX, and look at how nice it is. Okay. So we'll definitely be talking more, but this is the basics, and I hope you understand this. Now, this is where you need to pause, right? This is where you need to pause and you need to practice yourself. Now, what are you practicing? First, you need to teach yourself. Now, this is how I practice. I create a new HTML file, which is what you should be doing right now. And then I would create a hello world HTML H1 right here, and then I would go and pull in React. And while I'm doing each and every one of these things, I am talking to myself audibly. So I'm like, okay, so I'm gonna go to Google, I'm going to search CD and links, and the reason we're using CD and links is this, and I'm going to copy only this one first because I don't want to go to React, and I'm going to copy only this one first because I don't want to go to React DOM, and then I'm going to paste this into my HTML like this because of this, and just keep talking to yourself so that you understand exactly what you're doing. And then make sure you're doing every single thing I do. Don't assume, right? So just the practice is gonna make you understand this stuff and really solidify your knowledge. Okay, so once you're done practicing and you have all of this set up and you can explain, so this is how you be a good programmer. Be able to explain every single thing you write down, right? And of course, there are things that you wouldn't understand, but just have a really good desire to understand them, all right? Then practice and practice and be able to explain every single thing. And that's how you teach yourself to master the content. Okay, stage 3. We are going on real fast here. So, stage 3, the next stage is components. Let's talk about what are components. Now, before we dive into components, I want to talk a little bit about something, and that's HTML. So, let's say we had an input type of text. I would save that, refresh, and we should have that input here. Now this input is just a text box, and this is what we call an HTML element. But we want more from this. Maybe we wanted to put in a phone number or a date. Well, what if we wanted a date? HTML could go ahead and create an element called date like this, but it's going to be really cumbersome. We would have thousands of elements. So what did the HTML team do? They actually decided to do this thing called attributes, so that you can modify the behavior of this input so that it inputs the data that you want. So let's say we had input here. We'll just change the type to date and refresh, and now we have a date picker, and it's still an input, but now we have modified the kind of data that this input can take, which is dates. All right. Now, why is this important to understand? It's super important to understand. A component does one job. For example, input right here is an HTML component, and it does one job. It takes input from a user, right? And now, depending on the type of input, we can have different variations of that same component. But at the end of the day, it's doing just one job, which is taking input. Right? So let's say we had a type of password here. Of course, save this, refresh. Now we have a password. It's different. It behaves differently, but it does one job, which is take input. So no matter the front end framework you're learning, Angular, Vue, React, you're just going to be doing one thing, creating components. And your component should do one job, right? So because we have HTML elements like these, developers wanted more. Like, wow, it's cool that we can just pass these attributes and it modifies the behavior of this input, but I won't mind. I want to be able to create my own. I want to be able to create a counter, right? I want to be able to count, right? And that's not given by HTML. So they said, hey, let's create React so that any component you want, no matter how complex it is, you can create it with React. So what is 90% of this course going to be about? It's going to be about creating custom HTML elements with React, and these custom elements are called components, right? So with React, we have the power to create new HTML elements called components, and we'll talk about those in a second. So let's think about our first component. What could be our first component? If you visit any website, you will notice that there is a copyright at the bottom. Now this copyright shows the date. So let's just come here, create a footer. Maybe we just have a footer, and in here we are going to have a paragraph that says copyright, and then it would show us the year, maybe 2023. And all of you watching this tutorial in 2023, my name is Cathy Friend. Send me a postcard from the future. So this is the copyright, right? And it shows you copyright 2023, and next year it has to become 2024. Oh, now you have to come and change your code to 2024. All right, and maybe you always forget, and that's not good. So what if we had an HTML component that was just, you know, something like this, copyright, right? And once you just mount this component, you never have to worry about it. It's just always going to show you the current year. And once it's January 1st, the current year is just going to change, right? That would be cool. But of course, the HTML team, they have so much on their plate, so they can't create this component for us. So we are going to use React to create that component. So I'm just going to delete everything we have here so that as we type more, we get to learn more. All right. I'm also just going to delete the footer here, and we want to create a copyright. So first we are going to create a React component, and a React component is just a function that returns JSX. How cool is that? So I'm just going to say constant copyright, and that's the name of our component. First rule of components, let it start with a capital letter so that React can know the difference between the small letters, which are HTML elements, and the capital letters, which are React components. All right. So this is going to be a function. You can just create function with the normal function keyword, and now you need to return some JSX for it to be a React component. So we'll say return, and let's say we return a paragraph, and this paragraph is going to say copyright 2021. Okay, so now I am going to render this component. So React DOM dot render. First we need to pass in the element that needs to be rendered, but remember, this is not an element, this is a component, right? And how do we mount HTML components? So remember, this is an HTML element, but it's a component. So how do we mount it? We just do exactly what we do with HTML. So open brackets, copyright, and then slash close bracket, and the slash close bracket is for self-closing tags. And we can also do the double thing if we want to just really be like HTML, like this. And now we have mounted our component, or we have changed our component or mounted our component so that it becomes an element so that it can be displayed. All right, now we are going to do a comma and say document dot query selector. Remember, we still need to tell React DOM where to render this, and we are going to say query selector, and we'll pass in footer. Oh, we deleted our footer. Let's just bring that back, our footer. All right, so we want to put that copyright component in the footer. And now remember, we are just going to refresh, and great, look at that. Now if we check the footer right here, you can see our paragraph with copyright. Okay, awesome, right? but now it's still static. By January 1st next year, it's just gonna stay like this. So we need to use JavaScript to get the current year, and then we are going to put the current year right there. Now this is a function, which means we have superpowers. We can do whatever we want. We can call the database to pull in the current year, or we can just use the new date in JavaScript and get the current year. So this is a function. So I'm going to say constant year is equal to new date, and from this new date object we can say dot get full year, and get full year is going to give us the current year. So now instead of putting in 2021, we can put in the current year. So I'm going to use this curly braces, and this is what we call interpolation, and basically we are rendering a variable into HTML or into JSX. And what this is going to do is React is going to take a component, and anytime it sees this, it's going to take the value of this variable and inject it right here. All right, so how does this work? First, React DOM.render says this is the element. So when we put this angular brackets around the component, it's going to render the component, which means execute this function and then take the resulting JSX from the function execution and then put it on the page. All right, so first it executes the function and it realizes, oh, okay, we are getting the current year. So every time a user visits this page, this script is executed and then it gets the current year at that time when the user visited the page, and now it embeds that current year into some JSX that we are returning, and the JSX here is just a paragraph. All right, and now we can refresh the page, and now we have 2021. But what's the good news? The good news is next year it's just going to automatically change to 2022, 2023, and so on. Right? Really good stuff, right? So what if we wanted to show the current time? We can of course do the exact same thing, right? But this is exactly how our copyright is going to work. So we have React DOM.render copyright. So probably these big companies such as Google or Facebook, they have this copyright component, and then they have it on their footer, and then every year when you visit the web application at midnight, you just refresh the page and oh my god, they are so fast. Maybe they have automated robots that are behind the scenes updating all of their websites. No, it's React, and this is it. This is it, right? And this is a real use case of when you would really want to use React, when you want to create your own custom components that do something. Always remember, a component should have one responsibility, right? And this is the responsibility that this copyright component has, and it's doing a great job at it. All right, so this is time to pause. Make sure you create your own copyright component, and then make sure you can render the copyright component like this and put it on your page so that every time someone visits your website, it's updated. Practice, practice, practice. So go ahead and practice, and I will see you in step 4. Okay, step 4. We want to talk about styling. How do we style this? Because this is JSX, right? And this JSX is more like HTML. So we want to talk about how can we style this. And because we are doing a lot of JavaScript things, we are going to talk about the different ways to style React. Now, the first thing is, this is JSX. Now, how is JSX different when it comes to styling components or elements? So this is a paragraph. Now, how do we style this? We are going to pass in a style, and the style is not going to be a string. In HTML, this would be like something like color red, but now this is not HTML, it's JavaScript. So React takes in an object instead. So this curly brace, notice this thing that we always write. This is the first time we encountered it. Now we are saying it again. The open curly brace and then close curly brace. Every time you see this, know that we are about to write JavaScript into JSX. For example, now we did this with year, and we took a JavaScript variable and we injected it into JSX. So here we are about to do the same thing, and we are injecting an object. Now this object is going to be an object of styles. So we would say color, and we'll pass in red. And that's how you can style your elements with inline styling. So refresh. Great, look at that, we have red. And the reason we have this is so that if we had some dynamic styles, imagine a website that has light and dark mode. So you wouldn't want to just type red like this. You would want to use some complicated JavaScript to check if we are in dark mode, and then this would probably be black or white, right? So that's why we pass an object, and then we can dynamically change that object. This object can literally be coming from your database in case the user wants to customize their whole website. All right, so now refresh, we have our red. So we can change something else like font weight. So font weight, and this would be bold. And if I refresh, yes, it's bold. Notice that we didn't write font weight the way we write it in CSS. We wrote it using camel case. So the difference in JSX is this object, and since it's an object, we have to write the properties in camel case instead of the normal case. All right, and this just a change that you have to make when you're writing JSX itself. Now when we start writing more advanced React in actual JavaScript files, you'll be able to autocomplete this with VS Code, right? VS Code, let me try this. I just want to create an index.jsx, and in here I'm just going to say constant a is equal to a function, and I'll return a paragraph with JSX, right? So now I'm going to do a style, and I'm going to say color. Now look at that. VS Code can automatically suggest all of the style properties for us. Can you see that? And now we can just pass in the color, and then if we wanted font weight, you can see it suggests for us, and you can see all the suggestions, right? So don't worry, right now we are just writing in an HTML file, so we don't have the suggestions. But when we are writing in JavaScript files, you can see that VS Code is going to assist us, right? So you don't have to worry about which one is which and how to write it. We are going to get there. But I just wanted to show you this real fast, and make sure you try it out. It's really cool. All right, so I'll just delete this file right now. Yep, and now we're back here. So this is the first way to style React. This is inline styling, right? Just the way we normally do it. Now the second way is if we give this a class. So I'll just give this a class of copyright. But this would not work, because remember, it's not HTML, it's JSX, right? And the reason why this will not work is because JSX is going to be compiled by Babel to JavaScript, and class is a reserved keyword in JavaScript, because remember, we have JavaScript classes. So since we can't use class, because when Babel compiles all of this JSX, it's going to become JavaScript, and if we mix it up with JavaScript that has class, it's going to become very wrong. So the React team said we would use class name right here. So class is going to be replaced by class name, and this is going to give it a class of copyright. And now when we refresh the page, and if we click on that, so let's go to the footer, you can see that now in the browser it's just class. But that's when Babel has compiled everything and transformed the JSX into HTML, and now we have class. But in our code, we need to write class name. All right, and we'll talk more about the differences, but now we have a class of this, which means that we can just have a normal style right here, and we'll say dot copyright, and we can give this a font width of bold, and then maybe a font size of 18 pixels and a color of green. Okay, so now great. So if I click on this, you can see that the styles are coming from this class that we wrote. So another way to style React is to just give them classes, a bunch of classes, and then just style the classes just as normally as you would write your own HTML and CSS, right? So that's the way you can style your React. I think really straightforward, but very important to understand the differences between HTML and CSS. Sorry, between HTML and JSX, right? So that's it. I hope you learned something valuable in this section. Make sure you practice it. Practice. Super important. Okay, so next thing on our radar, we want to talk about props and what are props. So let's take a practical example, shall we? I think practical is the best. Let's come to what we call a design system. Think of any company, really. Any company comes to mind. Let's just check out udemy.com, right? So this is the Udemy website, and I want to show you something you would notice. It's their buttons. So if you check this page, you would notice that there's a button right here, and it's a big green button with white text, and then there's a transparent white button right here. And if we keep scrolling down, you will notice transparent button with green text, and it's used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. Same button used over and over. And now let's probably go to another page. Okay, look at, there's another button, a red with white text. Now let's go to this page, which is a whole new page. If we go to that page, you will notice the same button that we saw on that other page is used here, and this same button is used here again. Remember the white one with white borders, transparent background. And now look at the buy now button. Let me just bring this up. You can see the buy now button right at the bottom of the screen right here. It's the same button that we saw on the home page. Alright, same button that we saw here. Remember the one with the green text. So it looks like they have a fixed set of buttons that they use in different scenarios, and this is very common with many companies, right? And does that mean they have a ton of button components in their design system? Because Udemy actually uses React, so you begin to think about what components are they going to have, right? So they can have a button component. Now it's the same button over and over, but now what makes them different? It's just their background color and their foreground color, right? So you can see the background is red, and then the foreground color, the color of the text, is white, right? Look at that. So let's create a button component. Right now, the default button in HTML, if I just type button and say hello, if I come here, refresh, you can see we just have the normal ugly button, right? And now we can give this a class, which is cool, but what will be cooler is if we can do this with React. Okay, now let's say we wanted to, because obviously I told you Udemy is using React, so they have something like this. So what we want to do is kind of build out what they have, see it in action. First we have a red one, and then we have a green one, and then we have a transparent one. Okay, so we are going to create a button. So we'll say constant button. Remember, it has to start with a capital B, so it's different from the one that HTML gives. And this just has to return, it's going to return a button, which is the normal button that we know. So let's just render it first of all. First steps, let's just render it right here. So we've rendered our button, and here I'm just gonna say add to cart. Okay, so it's going to render not in the footer. Let's give this an ID of app, and we'll delete all of this, create a div with an ID of app. Alright, so refresh our page. That's our add to cart button. Alright, so I'm just gonna give this a class, and remember it's class name of button, and we'll just scroll right here, give this dot button, and let's see, let's say width of 100%, Okay, then we are going to say background color, or let's give this a color of white. Okay, and font family, just the same font family, and we're just going to say padding is going to be up and down. It's going to be 15 pixels and 0 pixels. Okay, so now if we refresh, that's our button. And the background, we've not customized the background. I'm just gonna also say border of none for now. Refresh, and yeah, that's our button. Okay, so we want to have different variants based on the background. So for example, let me just copy the color code of these buttons. So if I click on this, you can see EC5252. So I'm just going to say dot button red is going to have background color of EC5252. all right, so now if we wanted to have a button of red, we are going to say button red like this. Okay, so refresh, and now we have that button. All right, now what if we wanted this other button, this one right here, the buy now button? The color code is 0F7C90. So I'm just going to say dot button green, and we're saying background color is 0F7C90. all right, and now if I refresh, okay, we need to give it the background of green, and just give me 5 minutes to set up right here. So that's our background of green. And finally, oh yeah, we can work with those two. Okay, so like this. So we have the green button and we have the red button. So let's talk about props. All right, props, that's what we want to talk about. Props. Now a prop is just an HTML attribute. So you can see this div id equals app is a prop. That's the attribute value, that's the attribute name, the prop name, and that's the attribute value, the prop value. So basically it's a custom, it's a property that you pass to a component to modify its behavior, right, or its identity or whatever, just to modify it, right? Just like we talked about inputs, if you remember. Let me show you. If we come here and we have an input of type text, this is the input of type text that we have. But now if we change this input to type password, we have changed the prop or the attributes, and now we have also changed the behavior. That's exactly what we want. If we pass a prop of red to the button, it should change, right? And if it changes the button, it should become a red button. If we pass a prop of green, it should change and it should be a green button. So that's basically us replicating the functionality that normal HTML elements give us. So how do we accept props in React? We just accept function parameters. So the function is going to have a parameter, we'll call it props, it can be anything. And now we are just going to run a console.log props. Okay, so how do we pass props? It's just like we do it in HTML. I'm just going to say color is equal to red, like that. Okay, so now if I refresh, look at that, color equals red. And I don't know if you can see this, I'm just pull it up. Great, so color equals red right there. Now we can pass in as many props as we want. Maybe we want size equals large, like this. Refresh, look at that, size equals large. And React does a really good job at passing the props or the attributes passed to the element when mounting it into the component as an object. That way we can just access them easily. All right, so let's stick to color in this case. All right, so let's say color equals red, color equals green. If we save that, refresh, great, we have color equals green. So what if we wanted to determine what the class on this button should be based on the prop that is passed? So instead of passing in a string right here, we are going to pass in JSX or embed a variable. So let me just create a value here, and I'll say constant class name is going to be equal to a string, right? And now we are going to embed class name here. All right, and we are going to use the template string syntax to concatenate, and we are going to pass in button here, right? And instead of button dash green, we are going to do button dash, then we are going to concatenate props dot color, like that. And now the class of the button is going to be generated based on the prop that is passed in right here. And now if I refresh the page, great, we have a green button. But what if we passed in color of red and refresh? Now we have a red button, right? Really nice. Now we can have tons and tons of colors, but the advantage is we just have one component, and we just reuse that component over and over. And that's exactly what Udemy is doing. They have a component called button, right? And probably they're weird on their engineering team, and this is not called button, it's probably called button. And just, you know, we're just assuming, right? And they also have a red one, a green one, a transparent white one. And the difference is when they want to use one of them, they just pass a prop, and this prop modifies the behavior of the button, and they have just one component being reused over and over. All right, so we've basically done like what Udemy does, right? Just at a smaller scale. Let's say we wanted to render these two buttons so that we see. So I'm just gonna duplicate this. So Command C, Command V. Now we have two React domes.render, and this is going to be green. I would save that, refresh, and where is the red one? Oh, right, so I think this one is overwriting this one because we are rendering in the same place. So what I want to do is we are going to come here, and instead of rendering a button, we are going to render a div like this, and then inside that div we are going to render many buttons, because remember, you can only pass one element to React DOM, right? So instead of passing the button, we are passing the div so that inside we can have many buttons. So now here we have red and we have green, and now save and refresh. Great, look at that, we have two buttons, but they are the same component, just with different props right there. Cool, right? So what are props? They're just custom HTML attributes, right? So we see HTML attributes everywhere. Look at the source, the type, the ID. Now we want to be able to create ours, and now we have a component called button, and now you can just pass color equals green, just like it's a normal HTML element. That's really cool, right? So that's basically what props are. That's how they work. And you can see this is a practical example. So I would encourage you to go ahead and add a new more button, another button, which is the transparent button, and make sure it works. Try to see it work, right? And share with me if you have any questions at all. But you should be able to get props, which is just the parameter that's passing to your function component. It's going to be available here, and then you can use that to customize your component however you want. All right, one more thing we can add. Let's just say we wanted to add one more thing. Let's say we can pass disabled equals true. All right, so here we would have props.disabled, and then here we can also pass disabled to the button. I would say props.disabled. All right, so now if I refresh, you can see this one is disabled. I can't click, but now you can see this one is clickable. All right, not clickable, clickable. Yeah, we have a problem here. React says, hey, you were supposed to pass in a boolean, but you passed in a string. So this is what React is telling you, and the reason why we have this warning is because we are using React DOM development. All right, that's pretty cool. So here, instead of disabled true, you can just do disabled like this, and it would still work the same. And you can also pass in a boolean like this. All right, refresh, and that's cool. Awesome. All right, so thank you guys so much. for watching. Make sure you practice, because that's the key. Okay, are you back? Are you having fun? No? Yeah? No? Okay. Ooh. All right. So, I think we've been having so much fun with React, right? You know what? Let's go deeper, right? Let's talk about how you can use React to build huge projects, larger projects, bigger projects, all right? So, you can literally build your whole website with React, right? And that's what we want to talk about. Just, a closer look, right? So this is going to teach us, how to break down your website into different components and why. I'm just going to close this. That's so much advertisement for that guy with this course for Bitcoin. But so I'm just going to open up katifrance.com. This is my website. So you can see that's the title, the heading, and there's the name, this is the section, and then there's the body, and then there's projects, and then there's the footer with the newsletter. All right. So let's say you wanted to build my website, right? Remember, a component has just one and only one functionality. So let's say you wanted to build my website. How would you go about breaking this into different components so that we have a whole website with React? Good question. So remember, one and only one responsibility. So first thing is the top bar where I have my name and navigation. This would be one component, right? It has just one responsibility. Just show the navigation to the user. And then inside that component, maybe I'm going to have more components, such as if you look at the menu, you would notice this is like a list, and then there's each list item, and I can probably make each list item a component because maybe I want to customize the behavior and things like that. But if not, I'm just going to use normal list item with classes, right? Next, I would have the title of the page, which is here. And the reason I'll have a title is if you come to other pages, you will notice the same title, I think. Not the same. Oh, okay. Yeah, the same. So on the home page, you have this title. And then on the speaking page, we have the same title, the same styles, the same line, right? So once I begin to see the same duplication, it tells me, hey, I can extract this into a component so that we reuse it. All right. So next we have this body. This is text, and I will probably just have a text component that takes in a bunch of text like this and displays it with the correct styling and the correct background and everything. And we probably have the same thing in the about page. You can see there. All right. So the next would be the projects. Now, if you look at the projects closely, you would see we just have a heading, but then each card is exactly the same. So we have a card, we have a header and a body, header and a body, header and a body, header and a body, and then we have just the card with a shadow right there. So this is how you can identify on the design. So remember, most of the time if you're working, you would receive a design in Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD, and your responsibility would be to transform that design into a reusable component or into a website. And you need to have this conversation in your head that we're having right now about my website, about how to extract or find reusable components so that you would be really good at breaking down your application into different components. All right. So you've seen the way I've talked about how to break down the parts. For example, the header, I told you, hey, the header appears many times, so that would be a separate component. The body appears many times, so that would be a separate component. The projects, I would just have current projects, and then I would have a component called project where I pass in a title and text, and it renders this card. Same thing because it's over and over and over, right? And finally, you can see we have this button right here. If we go to other pages like the courses, maybe we want to see this course. And oh boy, come on. Okay, we have the same button, right? And that button means it's reused over and over, so we would have another button component, All right, so this is a really important part of knowing React, because you need to know how to break down your components. All right, so let's say we wanted to build an app. How would we do that? So let's just go ahead and delete all of this. All right, and create some components. So I would say constant top bar would be a function. Remember, a function is just a component, is just a function that returns some JSX. And here I would have a nav, and then in there, let me just format this correctly, and then in there I would have a logo, so maybe an h2 that says Cathy Friends, and then I would have an unordered list. The list item is going to have courses, and let me see, we have courses blog about, so I'll just copy this and copy it again. This would be blog, this would be about, and this is my top bar component. All right, now inside this component I can go ahead and have this hamburger button and things like that, but that's my top bar component. All right, so the next one would be my heading component. So constant heading would be equal to a function return, and I would have a div that would wrap all of this, or maybe I can use a header component like that, because it's the header of the page. And then that's a header function, a header element from HTML, right? Now we are going to have an h1, which is going to be Cathy Friends, or hey, I'm Cathy Friends. And next we have a paragraph, and I'm just going to copy this text right here, paste it right there. And now we also have the span, and this span is going to be get really good at software. All right, so now we have our heading, right? And then we have these other ones. Let me just go ahead and create the project, and this project is going to be tactical. So return would have a div, and the class on this div, or the class name, is going to be card, and I'll just close that out. And it's really difficult to type without the auto suggestions from VS Code. I'm sorry. And we should probably use article here, right? An article is just because, it's an article and we want to be semantic. So here we'd have a card, and inside the card we want to have, first let's look at this. We have a card, then we have the header, and then we have the body. So we'd have h3, and this would be call maintainer of Tensei.js. And next we have the paragraph, and this is going to be text, which is I'll just copy this and paste it right there. Okay, save that. And now this is our project, but remember we want to modify the behavior. So I would receive some props to this project. The h1 is going to be the title, so I'll receive the title and the body as props, and instead of rendering this, I would render the title like this, and instead of rendering this, I would render the body like this, like that. All right, and now we can just come here and we would have a constant app component, and this is what we always call a wrapper component. And the wrapper component is the one that is going to render the content of our page so that it's kind of understandable, shows the different parts and things like that, right? Because remember, you can always only pass one element to the render for React DOM, so we'll just create an app component that is going to house our app and render it. So first we need the top bar. So in our app component, we are going to return top bar. So we'll mount top bar like that. Next, we need the heading, so we are going to mount the heading like that. And finally, we need the projects, so we are going to mount an H1 or an H2 that says current projects, and H2. All right, and finally we are going to mount the projects right there. And to the projects, we need to pass in the title and the body. So title is going to be equal to core maintainer of Tensei.js, and the body is going to be equal to this body that I'm just going to copy right here and paste in, save, and now let's refresh. Okay, so look at that, we have our website. And this is the point, right? We want to be able to build our own websites. So you can see the title, the navigation, the title of the page, and then we have projects. So can you build websites in React? Yes, you can just create components for everything you need, break them down appropriately, and then mount them. All right, so this is our projects, but of course you can have multiple projects by mounting the project component over and over with completely different props. Let's just show you that. So I'll just duplicate this, and here we have the deploy Node.js book. I'm just going to show that in the second one, and I would copy the title. I'll just type it. So this would be deploy Node.js. Save that. Probably just do 2 to save some time. What's happening? There's something. Okay, yeah, the quotes. So I'll just delete this. Awesome. Now if I refresh, for the same project component, we have 2 different projects, right? And it's going to return a card like this if we added some CSS, but you get the point, right? This is how you can break down your website, render your website into a site like this, just like that. All right, so I just realized I haven't been saving the contents of the lesson so you can see the source code, but I hope you've been following along and you're able to get the source code for everything just by watching, right? Okay, so that's it. Make sure you go to another website, any website of your choice. But yeah, preferably my website, really nice. But take another page, right? Like this one, or not this one, the course, perfect page. Break it down, and I'll give you a hint. This website is built in React, and I have a component for these small boxes right here because I use them everywhere. Then I have a component for these boxes, right? And then if I expand this website, let me just expand it, you will notice that they are in rows. I have a component for each row. So just go ahead and think about how you want to break this down, and then ask me some more questions. Make sure you write it out like this. Ask me questions, DM me on Twitter, text me. I'm going to reply you. We're going to have a conversation, and I'm just going to give you feedback so you can improve. All right. So yeah, that's it. That's it for this step. That's it for this step. All right. So let's go to the next step. Let's go to the next step. It's going to be, I'm not going to delete this anymore now that I remember. So I'm going to create a counter folder like this. And in here, I'm going to have an index.html. And I'm going to come to the starter and copy everything, paste it right there. And now I would delete the contents of this, like this. Yep. No. Yep, like this. And now we are going to create a component called counter. It's just a function. And I'll explain to you which concepts we are trying to learn now. Okay, so let's just render the counter on the page using HTML like syntax by just rendering the JSX. and great. Oh yeah, this is opening this one, so I just want to copy the path and then paste it right here, and now we have a counter demo right here. Okay, awesome. So what are we doing with the counter? Our next practice exercise is talking about events and event listeners. Really important concept, so let's talk about it. So let's say you have a job in React and you have to build a shopping cart page and you need a counter. And if you don't know what a counter is when you're shopping for a product and you want to increment the counter. So by 1 2 3 or 3 2 1. I think if we check out just let's see this website. I think they had a really nice counter that I can show you guys so that you kind of understand how it works before we go into it. So how do I get to the let me see if I can just go straight and add this to carts, view products, buy now. So this should take us to the store, and awesome. So now if you expand this, you would see this tiny little counter right here for the quantity. So you can see 1 2 3, and as I'm clicking that, it's increasing the price. 3 2 1, 1 2 3 4 5. You can see that, right? That's the counter. So this could have been built with React. So we want to kind of do the same thing, right? So in this counter, let's just have some 3 buttons. So we'd have a button, this would be minus, and would have another button, and this would be plus, and finally would have a span, and this would show us the current count. Okay, so this is a counter, and if we refresh, great, that's a counter right there. Okay, so you can see plus, minus, and of course nothing is happening right now. So we need what we call event listeners to be able to know when a user has clicked on the button, and then we would perform some action. Okay, so the way we pass event listeners is just by passing attributes to the elements. So for example, an example of an event is the click. So when the user clicks on a button, we want to perform a specific action. So to the button plus here, I'm going to say on click, and HTML we have on click, but this is not HTML, so we'll say on capital C click. And this is how it is in JSX. We need to pass in a function that should be executed when that button is clicked, and this is a valid function. So now we can create functions here that would act as, you know, the functions that are invoked when our event is triggered. So I'll say constant plus, and this would be a function that will be executed when the user clicks on the plus button. All right, so instead of passing this function right here, I would pass in plus. All right, just the function. We are not calling the function, we are just passing the function itself. All right, and React is going to invoke this function when the click event is triggered. So now let's come here, and I'm just going to say console.log, yep, I was clicked. Okay, so now if I refresh and click on the plus, yep, I was clicked, yep, I was clicked, right? And that's how easy it is for us to listen to events in React. Okay, so let's say we wanted another function, and this would be for the minus. So when the user clicks on the minus button, we invoke the minus function. So on click would be equal to, again, the query brackets, because we want to embed JavaScript, and we'll pass in minus and refresh, plus, minus, plus, minus, plus, minus. All right, so that's it, right? That's it, the plus and the minus. Okay, so what's the next step? We can register events, and there's tons and tons and tons of events that we can register. So I want to show you another one on hover, for example, on capital hover. Literally any events that you can use in JavaScript is supported by React, of course. So here on hover, we are going to pass in plus. So now, instead of happening only when we click, when we hover over that button, it's going to trigger. I think this is, on hover, not on hover, sorry, on mouse enter. That's the name of the event. There's nothing like on hover in JavaScript. It's on mouse enter. So if I refresh and I enter, look at that. It's triggering the function. It's calling the function every time I enter the element. We can also do on mouse leave tons and tons and tons of events and event listeners, but just pass a function and that's it. All right, so that's basically how we can pass in event listeners to our JSX, right? Just like passing these attributes. All right, so now what do we need to complete our counter? Because now we can listen to when the user clicks on the button, and we can also listen to when the user clicks on the negative button. So what do we need to do to complete our counter? Now this is where state comes in. State is when we need to remember something in the browser or in React, right? So for example, let me show you something practical about state. So let's say we had an input of type equals email, right? If I refresh and I type this, probably I should put this in a form so we can submit. So we put the email here, and I would have the button of type equals submit, and we would have submit here. So if I refresh this, now if I click submit, now if I type an invalid email and click submit, you can see there's a huge error that says please include something, please include an @ right? Now this is the browser doing its thing, but you kind of begin to think, how does the browser know that it's not valid email? That's where state comes in, because what the browser does is it takes the text that you wrote and then it saves it in memory, and then when you are done typing and you try to submit, it's going to take that in-memory value and it's going to check it and see if it has a valid @ or it's a valid email. Now that in-memory we are talking about is called state, because we remember what is happening on the page. We need to remember it, right? And that's exactly what we want to do in this case. We have a counter and we need to remember what is the count value, so we display the correct value here. Okay, now that's where state comes in. So let's create a piece of state. So we are going to say react.useState. We are saying, hey, we want to use some state, and the useState function takes in just one value. Just what is the initial memory that you want to remember? What's the initial state? In this case, it's 1, because the quantity by default, let's just say it's for an e-commerce store, is 1. Okay, and that's it. It's just normal. Okay, so now the React useState function is going to give us two exciting things. It's going to give us a function. This is what we call it's going to give us an array. This is array destructuring. So it's going to give us an array of 2 elements. So we are getting the elements by destructuring, right? Or we can do something like this, result, right? And this result is an array of 2 elements. All right, so what we want to do here is, first of all, we are going to get counter is equal to result 0. Now the first element from that array that is given to us by the React.useState is the state that we saved. At every given time, whenever we add or remove to that state, this counter is going to have the value of the state. The next thing we want is a setter. So constant set counter is going to be result 1. Now the counter is the state. The set counter is a function that can help us update that state. All right, so remember we said you have a state or a piece of memory, something that you need to remember, and then you need a function to always add or remove from that thing that you're trying to remember, or you want to update it in case it changes. Now you also need a way to get what is there, and that's what counter is. All right, so now that we have this, I think it's clear now. So we are just going to use the destructuring syntax. Set counter like this. All right, so that's what we call array destructuring, so that we can just get the first and the second items from the array returned by useState. So we have counter and set counter. Counter is the value of the state that we are trying to remember, and set counter is how we can update that state. So I think you're probably already guessing what we're going to do, right? Let's just start by console.logging the counter. All right, and now when the component is rendering, remember that React is going to execute this function, and then it's going to return JSX, which means the execution is going to pass here, right down to here. So if I refresh, now you can see 1 somewhere right here. You can see there's 1 right here. All right, and this is the counter state. Okay, but now we need to display that counter where we have 99, right? So we are going to embed that counter here. Okay, and now if I refresh, wait, we still have the 1, and now the 1 is displayed here. Okay, interesting, right? So now how do we change that state? When the user clicks on the plus button, I'm just going to remove the on mouse enter thing, and when the user clicks, this is the plus button. What we are going to do is set counter. We're calling the set counter function that useState gave to us, and we'll pass in the current counter, which is counter plus 1. Cool, right? So now the magic of React is every time we call set counter, React is going to say, oh, you updated the state, and now I know that you've updated the state. The value in the state has changed, so we can't be showing 1 here anymore. So React is going to do what we call a re-render. It's going to render the component all over again, and now it's going to give us the latest value of the state. So now if I refresh, click on this, look at that, like magic, it's updated. So what's happening here, if I open up the elements and open this up so you can see, go into the div, look at this closely, look at that, and notice that it's blinking, whoosh, whoosh. Now React is doing what we call really smart re-rendering here. It's going to re-render the component, which means mounts the component all over again, executing all of this JavaScript all over again. But it's going to be very smart about that, because remember, only the counter has changed. The buttons are still the same, so React is changing only the span that has the counter, and that's why you can see only the span blinking. Even though it's rendering everything, it's changing only the span. All right, so now let's do the same thing for the minus. So when it's minus, again, we are going to set the counter to counter minus 1. All right, so now if I refresh, 1 2 3 4 5, that's it, we have our counter. Look at that, we have our counter. We do, that's our counter right there. That's a counter. Awesome, right? So we have created a counter using state. Now state is probably one of the most important aspects to remember when building components, because almost all of the time you are going to need state. For example, let's say you're building an app and it's dark mode, light mode. How do you remember that the user is on dark mode and it's on light mode? You use state. You put it in the state, and then when the user clicks on that dark mode button, it transforms to dark mode, and now you update the state and say, hey, we are in dark mode. And now your components, such as these ones, would have classes and styles based on the state. If the state is dark, then this is going to have a dark color. If the state is light, it's going to have a light color, and things like that. All right, so state is everything. State is awesome, right? Like you can see right here, we are using state to determine what to display as the quantity right here. So now this user knows that they are purchasing 17 items from the e-commerce store. All right, so this has been a lot. Please make sure you practice. Make sure you understand what use state is, and if you have any challenges at all, please try to watch at least twice, because it's better. You get to hear things that you didn't hear the first time around. Okay, so yeah, that's state in React. We can use it to remember what the user did. But now remember, of course, if we refresh the page, it sets back to 1, because when you refresh the page, the script has to re-execute all over again, and the browser would execute this, and then it would come back to 1, right? And it's the same thing like the state we talked about in the input. So if you check out input type equals text, if we refresh the page, if we type my name is, right, and then I refresh the page, notice that it's back to empty. It's back to its initial state, because the browser also has its own state. And then when you refresh, it clears the state. It's in memory. It clears the state. All right. So that's it. I hope you had fun learning about states. All right. I hope you had fun, but you need to practice. You need to practice. You need to build this counter component alone. Right. You need to learn how to build it yourself. So remember, when you're building, be explaining this stuff to yourself. If you got a brother, a sister, a child, a sibling, whoever, a spouse, call them and sit them down and explain this thing to them. As like just explain as much as you can until they understand, and that's how you know that you've really understood the concepts. When you can explain to have someone understand, very simply break it down, you would understand more. All right, so thank you guys so much for watching. More concepts for us to learn, right? More concepts. Okay, we are back. We are back. And now we are going to build a powerful application, a note-taking application. Okay, this is going to use all the knowledge we have about states with some new knowledge that we do not have yet, and learn how to build React components. So let's build a note-taking application, right? This is a counter. I'm just gonna come here and have notes, and it's going to be a new tiny app, and I'm just gonna copy the counter example, paste it in the notes, and this is going to be note-taking app for the ultimate React crash course. Let's clean this up. We don't want the counter anymore. All right, so I'm gonna have an app component. That's just where we would have all of our components, and this is going to return a div, and we would mount that app component here like that. Make sure we have our document.query selector app. There it is. All right, so a note-taking application. We want people to take notes. Oh, let's copy the path. So copy path and paste it right there. A really simple, ugly note-taking application, but it has to work, right? So what's the aim? A user types in an input box, and we save the notes, right? And we display the list of all the notes the user has taken on the browser, so the user can see it. Okay, so how do we do this? First, let's start by breaking down the components we need. And for now, I'm just going to represent the components with HTML because we don't have a design, right? So first we need an input. So I'm just going to create an input here. Okay. And next we need a list. So I'm going to have an unordered list. Okay. And this is going to have an li right? And this is really ugly, but when we move to a JavaScript file, it's going to be much easier to format our JSX. So just, for now, so I'm just going to say take the dog out on a walk, right? And now if I refresh, great. So this is our standard, or what we want. Okay, so this is exactly a text. You type in here, you hit enter, right? And then it displays it right here. Okay, and now inside this list, we are going to have a button, and with an X, refresh. And after you're done, you're no longer interested, you hit X, it deletes just that one, right? That's what we are interested in. All right, and I'm just going to give this a class of, class name of close button, just because even though it's ugly, the X is bugging me that it's stuck to the text. So I'm just going to have style, then dots close button. I'm just going to say margin left of 10 pixels, save, refresh, and yeah, the world is a better place right now, right? So yeah, so we have the input, we have the unordered list, and we want to build this out. We want it to work, right? So remember, the first thing is we need to think about and what's the point of first of all doing this? It's so that we can outline and see the different parts that we want, and we already do. So first, I begin to think, if we have to remember all the nodes, then we probably need a list of all nodes. But how do we know there's a list? State. We need to remember state. But now we also need to get the value from the input text when the user types. Now that's why we need an event listener. We also need to know when the user hits enter. Event listener. Okay, so let's do this, right? Here we are going to say on enter, and I think there's on enter, and I'm going to say on enter on input. That's the name of the function that would be invoked or called by React when the user hits enter. And constant on enter on input is equal to this. And I just remembered now, there's no on enter or in React, there's no on enter anywhere in anything. So I think there's on key press, right? And now I'm just gonna come here and get the event, because React is always going to give us the native event right here. So console.log event. It's not the native event, but it's the event wrapped in some React stuff. So on key press, it calls this function with the event. So let's see this. I'll refresh. Okay. Then I'll go to console, and then I'm going to see what happens. I press the key. Look at that. We have the event. Okay. And if we check out the events, you can see which key was pressed. You can see which, I'm not sure if the which is what we're interested in, but there is a key code right there. It's key code 0. So now let's press the enter key, and I'll hit enter. And now if we look at that event, you can see the key code. Hold on, I'm not sure exactly. Okay, yeah, which is what we're interested in. So which is 13, so that's the key that was pressed. So if I press key 0, check out which, you can see number 48, right? So when the user types and hits enter, let's hit enter again, check the key press, which is 13. Now I want to hit type as much as I want. And if I type, as long as I don't hit enter, which is not going to be 13. So first thing we are going to do here is we are going to say event dot which is not equal to 13. Return. Okay, so this is which. How do I put it? We want to know when the user hits enter. All right, and that's how we check. Now we want to also confirm that we are checking the right thing. So I'm just going to say events.which. I think I used to do this another way, but let's just see. So let's type this, great, we have the correct which right there. So if I hit enter, you can see 13, 13, 13, 13, 13. All right, so we are doing the right thing. So if event.which is not 13, then the user did not hit the enter key, right? So I'm gonna say console.log and would say, yay, you hit the enter key. All right, so now I'll refresh and I'll type this, hit enter, yay, you hit the enter key. Awesome, right? So now we can listen to when the user hits enter. So now let's also console.log the event .target, and now if I refresh, type this, hit enter, that's the target, it's the input, and it's just a normal input, which means we can do value. Okay, so we refresh the page, the user's typing a long story, then they hit enter. And now look at that. We have the value that the user typed in. Awesome, right? The user types, and then hits enter, and we have the value. Another hit, enter. Great. Look at that. We have the value. So we have the value. Now we need to make that value appear here by magic, right? So remember, state. Every time we update state, React is going to re-render, and it's going to display what we want, right? So for now, what we are going to do is, now we are going to create state. So what is our state going to be? Let's just say react.uState. The initial value is going to be an empty array. Now we are going to have notes and set notes, because remember the two functions that uState gives to us, the state and then the way to set that state. So notes is going to be an array of strings, right? So every time the user hits enter, we would push that string to the new array or to the array, and then it's going to be available here. So basically it's going to be something like, you know, first note here and then the second one here, an array of strings. Okay, and that's how we would store it in state. We can put whatever we want in state. Okay, so in this case we are going to be putting an array of strings that you know, when the user types and hits enter, we put it there. So what we are going to do again is, you can always put a console.log to see your notes. So I'm just going to put notes, and notice it's outside of this function, it's just before the render. Now the reason I put it here is because I know whenever state changes, React is going to re-render the component. So that's why when it's rendering the component, it would encounter this console.log and execute it. So now if I refresh, you can see we have an empty array here because React just rendered and it has an empty array. Okay, so when the user hits enter, what do we want to do? Well, I'm going to do a security check just to make sure that the user is not hitting enter when the value is not available. So I'm going to say, if not, event.target.value return. Return means stop the execution, just exit this function, right? And now we need to add this, which is event.target.value, to the notes array. So we are going to say set notes, and we are going to say notes would spread the current notes, which means all the strings, we maintain them, and then we add a new one, which is event.target.value. Okay, that's it. So on enter, on input, is going to be triggered when we press the enter key, and then we would add the text that the user just typed into the notes array. So how should this work? If I refresh, we have an empty array right here for the notes. So now I would type, my name is Franz, and when I hit enter, we should see the notes console.log show up again. Why? Because we would update the state by calling the set notes function, as we are doing right here, and then React would re-render, and then we would see our notes again. So I'll hit enter. Great. Now if I keep doing that, look at that, we have more and more elements in that array because it keeps putting it in that array. Awesome, right? But now watch the console.log. If I delete everything and I hit enter, Nothing. Why? Because we have this as security right here. If you didn't type anything, it just returns. Awesome, right? So the next step is using this array of strings that we have to generate this list right here, right? And that's the coolest part about all of this. So this is what we are going to do. We are going to create a new component, and this is going to be list item. And the list item is going to be just a React component, and it's going to return a list item, and inside that list item we would have some text, and then we would have a button, and this is going to have a class of close button. All right, and would have our X right there. Okay, so this is our list item component, and what will we use the list item component for? We are going to replace that here, so I'll just mount it. Okay, so now if I refresh, we have our list item component. I can duplicate this, refresh. Great, we have it multiple times like that. Okay, so for each note in our notes array, we want to display a list item. Does that make sense? So what we are going to do is we are going to say constant list items would be equal to notes. So we have the notes, and we are going to map over each of the notes. So we'll map notes, and map is like a transformation. So we are going through an array of items, and for each item we want to transform that item into something else, and we are going to be transforming that item into a list item. So now we are going to pass list item like this. So we are rendering the list item. So this list items is going to be an array of list item elements, because remember, this is a component right here, not mounted. It's just a component. But now when we mount it, we get an element, a React element, which is no longer a component. It's now just an element. And now we can just render list items right here. That's it. So for each note, return a list item, and we'll still get back to this, but it's just like, the map is an array. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. This is an array of 4 items, and now we want to map over these 4 items to transform and get maybe the square of the numbers. So we are going to have 1, and the next one is 2, so the square is 4. The next one is 3, so the square is 9, and the next one is 4, so the square is 16. Now we just mapped over those numbers, because for each item we transformed it in a certain way. So that's what we are doing here. For each item, or for each note, we want to transform it into a list item, and that's what we did. So now if I refresh, of course at the beginning, because the array is 0, the list items array is still an empty array. But now let's go ahead and type in something. We are going to type in France and hit enter. Great, now automatically we have the list item appear there. Now let's hit enter again. Look at that. Awesome, right? Awesome stuff, because now we are rendering based on our states, and every time our state changes, the component re-renders and then renders the new HTML for the page based on the states. Cool, right? So how does it know? How does it, well, it's good, right? That's one of the most powerful things that React can do for us. Okay, but now the list item, how does it know what to display? We are going to receive a prop in the list item, and this is destructuring, right? I think I should have mentioned it the first time. If we're working on anything and we do anything and you don't understand, just do a quick Google to learn about that feature in JavaScript, and then you can come back, right? So right here we are destructuring the props, and here we are going to get text, okay, and we are going to display that right here, and I'm just going to render text in the list item, which means when we mount the list item, we are going to pass in text as a prop, and text is going to be the note. Awesome, right? And now if I refresh, type in friends, hit enter, oh, we have friends. Mary, oh, we have Mary, and something else. Awesome, right? I just keep typing and hit enter, hit enter, hit enter, something else, right? That's really powerful. That's amazing. That's really amazing, right? So that's basically how we can render a list of items with React. We just map, generate the JSX, and then display it. Okay, so now we have an error that keeps showing up. Each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Now, why is that? Because React is going to render the same list item over and over and over. So it needs to keep track of which item is which. And since it doesn't know the content of your list, it needs you to pass in a unique key. So a key could be anything really. It could be an ID, it could be a string, anything that is unique to the item in that array. So in this case, the note is unique, but it's not always going to be unique because, for example, I can type France twice. So for now, what we are going to do is we are going to use the index. Okay, and we are going to use that to generate a unique key. So the key is going to be equal to note dash index. So dash, then I'm gonna concatenate the index, right? So I think, yeah, so that's it. So now if we refresh and we type in France, no matter how many times we type France, the key is unique, and now React is no longer complaining. Awesome, right? So basically, when you're building real applications, the data that you're displaying in an array, it would have a unique identifier, like an ID or a unique whatever, right? It will. So you would use that as the key. For now, we're just generating the key based on the note and the index. All right, and that tells React, hey, you can keep track of these elements. It's just for React so that they can render properly. So every time you're rendering an array in JavaScript, every time you're rendering an array in React, just keep that in mind. All right. Okay, so final step, we need to make this button work. When we click on this button, it should remove the node from state. All right, so first we need the event listener, but the button is not here, it's right over here in this component. So this is what we need to do. We need to pass a prop to the child, and then the child would invoke that prop, right? So basically we are going to come here and we are going to say constant on remove, and would receive a function, or would pass a function. And basically what we want this function to do is receive the index of note. Okay, and then it would handle removing that index or removing that note from the state. So we are going to come here and would pass a prop to the list item called on remove. So on remove is going to be a function like this, right, that calls the on remove that we have here, and then passes in this index. Look at the index right here. So we pass the index, and this may be confusing, but basically we are passing another function, and this function is generated based on the index. Or something else we can do, we can pass in this. Let me show you something. We are going to pass in on remove as a function right here, and then we are going to pass the index to the list item. So we'll pass in index equals index. All right, and this is becoming too long. Let me break it down a little so it's easier to understand. So we'll break this down, break down the props like that. Awesome. Okay, so now that's our JSX. So we are passing on remove, this is on remove, and it needs the index of the node, and we've also passed the index to the list item. So now we can come to the list item and we would receive the two props here. We would receive index and we would also receive on remove. All right, remember the name of the prop is on remove and the value is a function. So now we need to listen to when this button is clicked. So we would pass on click to the button, and the on click is going to call the on remove function with the index. That way we are passing the index for each list item. It's going to pass its own index, right? So now this function is going to console.log the index of nodes. All right, and let's refresh. If we type something, hit enter, another thing. Now the last one, 1 2 3 4 5, is going to have an index of 4. So if I click on that, you can see we have 4. The first one is going to have an index of 0. We have 0. Now the second one is going to have an index of 1 and 2 and 3 and so on. So now we get the index, and all we need to do is remove that index from the nodes. So we're just going to come here and we're going to say set nodes, and we are going to do some little JavaScript magic. We'll say nodes.filter, and would filter each node, and would get nodes and index here. And now what we want to do is return the nodes if the index is not the same. So index is not equal to index of nodes. So the filter is the way we filter an array. We want to remove some unwanted elements. So when we filter, we would get, let me just break this down like this so that it's easy to understand. So when we filter the nodes, it's going to return to us a brand new array, and that array is going to contain only items where the index of that array element is not equal to the index that we received from this function. And then we'll get that brand new array, and then we set the nodes to that brand new array. And now if we refresh, type, now if I click on this one, look at that, it's gone. 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 Interesting stuff, right? I type, I hit enter, another name, I hit enter, and if I hit the delete button, it's gone. Just the one I clicked. Awesome, right? That's really powerful. That's really powerful, because now you can build entire applications with the basic concepts that you've learned, right? So one final thing before we wrap this up. One final thing. What if we wanted green backgrounds for the list items with a positive index, with an even index, and then a red background with the list items for an odd index? Now basically what I mean is we want to see green, red, green, red, green, red. So I'm just going to come here and I would add a style to the list item, and the color is going to be, and I would say index modulus 2, and this is going to tell me if it has a remainder, and if it's equal to 0 it means it's even. So this is going to have a green background, all right, else is going to have a red background. Oh, this is not background, this is color. I can change this to background color like this. All right, so I just want to show you how we can use props. I don't know how to break this down. Yeah, so I just want to show you how we can use props to dynamically render elements on a page, or render different colors and things like that. So in this case, we are checking the index and then generating or determining what the style should be. And now if I refresh, we have friends. Great, we have green. So cousin should be red, and another, and final, and just like that. And this is how conditionals work in React. We haven't done much of conditionals, but yeah, this is really exactly what the the conditionals would look like. And you can see here we are generating JSX based on some value. We can do the same thing. So we can say if a certain value is equal to another value, then the JSX should be this, else it should be this. But we'll talk about that, in upcoming lessons. All right, so I hope that makes sense. I hope you learned a lot just from this tiny tutorial, right? I hope you learned a lot about React. We've gone really deep into React, but we haven't even touched the surface, and I think you are gonna have a lot of fun when we start going deeper. But right now, you should be able to create tons and tons of React components. So just think about a component and then build it. All right, so thank you guys so much. It's been 2 hours, so I think this is gonna come down to around 1 hour 45 or 2 hours tops. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you take your time, learn more about React. If you love the contents of this, then let me know. I am going to build the next 2 hours of the ultimate React crash course if you guys are interested. All right, and it's going to be much more powerful than this. By the end of that one, you're going to be building crazy apps. I'm a practical man. We build practical stuff, right? We learn practical. So if you love that, please make sure you send me a message on Twitter. Talk to me, tell me you want the next version, right? And I'm gonna do it so that you can solidify your React knowledge, which means in 2 hours you can, maximum 6 hours. If you go through this, you can be a really good React developer already. And then I am willing to do the next version, which is going to be a step further from this if you're interested. All right, so thank you guys so much. Make sure you subscribe to my newsletter, follow me on Twitter, because that's where I have conversations, asking about your feedback, knowing what you want to learn, and also providing a ton of value so that you can keep growing in your career. All right, thank you guys so much. I'll see you in the next ultimate crash course.